Should I'll name the councillors in the room, I think, first. So Councillor Smith, Chairman Story, Councillor Dunmar Smith, Councillor Kneebone, Councillor Nicol, Councillor Hughes, Councillor Downer, Councillor Mayor, Councillor Graff and Councillor Clarkson, all attendants and strangers online. Thank you, Angela. So I'd like to welcome you all here this morning, and I'll get Greg to do the karakia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Mōrena councillors. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kinakina kia uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, I aki ana te atakura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti hei, Māori order. Mr. Chairman, before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge the staff in the room. There'll be some familiar faces, but possibly a couple of new faces as well. So I'd like to welcome Kate Lewis to the meeting. She is our Catchments team leader for Hauraki Coromandel, based up in the Whitianga office. So often online, but here in person today. And we also have Paul Smith, long-serving staff member, has recently taken up the role of Waipa and West Coast Zone Manager. Welcome, Paul and Kate.
Thank you. I'm talking to Leah, and we'd just like to take the health and safety policy as read. Is everyone fine with that? Thank you. So through to apologies. Any apologies? None. So the next one. Confirmation of agenda. We have a mover and a seconder, please. Bruce. Oh, thank you. All right.
Oh, it does. Wow, I'm really having a bad day.
Jesus. Thank you.
Management. Integrated catchment management.
Yeah. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Disclosures of interest. Have we any disclosures of interest? None. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So our first item, I'd like to welcome John Walsh to the meeting. So John is online. He is the Director, Readiness and Response Services with Biosecurity New Zealand, and is here to talk to the committee about a couple of new to New Zealand pests that have been particularly prevalent in the Waikato region, both Corbicula and Caulerpa. So I've got Patrick Whaley as well at the table to provide some opening comments before we move to John.
Thanks, Greg. Good morning, councillors. Look, I don't have a lot to add. You guys, we've talked about this both through the long-term plan and at previous meetings. Caulerpa being the seaweed out off the coast of Coromandel and in Auckland and in Northland. Corbicula is otherwise known as the golden clam. Which again we've spoken about in various meetings. So look, really pleased that John's able to meet with us today. I know he's really busy at the moment, so I really appreciate that. And like our teams have been working really closely with Biosecurity New Zealand and other councils and other stakeholders and partners. So yeah, I just hope. Look, I know John's going to give you heaps of time for questions, so take the opportunity. Thank you.
All right, John, over to yourself.
Thanks, Greg. Mōrena tātou. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to come along and update you on both of these incursions. They're both really serious incursions and have the potential to be quite impactful environmentally and economically. So really pleased to have the opportunity. We have provided you with written updates on both of those incursions, so a lot of detail in there. So I'll just make some preliminary comments and then open up to questions if that's okay. And I thought I might just start off with the freshwater gold clam, Corbicula. As you know, it was found in the Waikato River just over a year ago, May last year. It's been very challenging for lots of reasons for us and you guys and for everybody involved. The principal reason because of those potential impacts, and nobody wants it here and everybody would like it gone, but our ability to get it on, to get rid of it is not high. And so our focus has been on understanding where it is and controlling or trying to prevent the spread of it out of the Waikato River to elsewhere. And look, I'd have to say that there's, to the best of our knowledge, it hasn't spread anywhere else, and there is an element of luck there, clearly, because it had been in the river for at least 3 years before we found it. But since we have found it in the river, between us and the council and others, there's been a really quite immense and impressive effort to hold it there. We've had significant surveillance in the Waikato River catchment in the really high risk areas around the Rotorua Lakes and Lake Taupo and at high risk areas throughout the country. And other than this anomaly at the Taupo Aqua Park, it is nowhere, and it is a different species we've since determined. Corbicula doesn't exist anywhere other than in that quite long stretch of the Waikato River from Maraetai down to nearly the ocean. As Patrick noted, the focus now is a long-term program. We're going to be battling with this thing for the foreseeable future. So we're working collaboratively between the council and Biosecurity New Zealand stakeholders, mana whenua, on what that long-term program might look like. A bit of water to flow under the bridge on that. But the comment I'd make is that you guys clearly have a central role to play because it is only in your region. But we have a really strong role to support you and to continue to take leadership because, between us, we're trying to protect the rest of New Zealand, right? So we're certainly in their boots and all, and will continue to be in their boots and all. I thought I'd just pause there and open it up for questions.
Councillor Kneebone.
I'm at home and turning the wrong knob. Apologies, John. It's Joe Kneebone here, John. Hey, just a comment, and look, I'm just not close enough to know, but it feels like the efforts going in to prevent the golden clam from getting into the Rotorua Lakes are a lot more significant with a lot more resources behind them than the efforts to keep it from getting into Lake Taupo. Do you have any sort of commentary on that?
Yeah, kia ora, Stu. Look, we see both Taupo and the Rotorua Lakes as similar risks, I suppose, for the prevention of similar risks for spread because of proximity to the infected parts of the Waikato River, known boat movements. There are some different things happening at Rotorua than at Taupo, and that's probably a result of dynamics in both of those regions, but there is a really significant effort going into both of those locations. In Rotorua, we've got a very active, helpful, supportive regional council and iwi and mana whenua, led by Te Arawa Lakes Trust. Some different dynamics in terms of stakeholders in Taupo, and that has sort of resulted in some differences in the actions that we're taking, and probably the principal one, Stu, is the use of the exclusion can in Rotorua Lakes, which we haven't put on Lake Taupo, but I would say yet. We've had discussions on and off with parties up there over the last 6 months, really, about whether or not to put can there. We haven't reached agreement on it yet. We are at the end of this month, we're going to undertake a formal review of all of the cans, including the one on the Waikato River. We'll be involving your staff in that, and we'll be again turning our head to looking at whether or not we use that particular regulatory tool around Taupo. Otherwise, the efforts are quite similar. Quite intensive surveillance at both places, quite intensive public information support at both locations, and compliance with CAN requirements where we can do that. And that's always a challenging one for us and others, because as you guys know, compliance boots on the ground is quite a challenging thing to organise logistically and from a budget point of view. But we're doing what we can there.
Okay, now thanks, John. And the only other one was just, I guess, a request to keep the comms up, please, because the putting my River Authority hat on, I found out about the River Authority found out about the Taupo, that other one incursion via a press release that came out from you guys, I think, which
look.
Yeah.
Apologies, Stuart. Look, I know there was an email that went out to the current members on the governance group before that press release went out, and we have to move on these things quite quickly. I did hear that it wasn't picked up by the Waikato River Authority. I'm not really quite sure why, because I'm fairly certain the email went out. But point taken, Stu. I think all the way through this, just keeping those consistent comms going has been a bit challenging for us.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. Look, thanks, John. I appreciate the straight up response here. Cheers.
Ka pai.
Councillor Clarkson.
Well, good morning, John. It's Bruce Clarkson here. I'm supportive, of course, of the containment approach that's being taken at the moment, but I sort of view the new record of the other clam, the non-golden clam, the Australian one, as being further evidence of, well, it's clearly a second border breach at least. And so the longer term strategy in keeping this thing out of the wider region of the Waikato and across the country is sort of put into a different perspective with the second breach. And I'm wondering what your current thoughts are on where the incursions have actually, how they've crossed the border, and what the likelihood is of further border breaches which will supplement regional invasion and national invasion.
Yeah, so quite a lot of questions in there. So look, clearly both of those species have come across the border at some time. Hard to know when, and hard to know how. Certainly since the first incursion, Corbicula fluminea, the folk at MPI responsible for setting border standards, etc., have been reviewing those. They're still under review. The import health standard, as it's called, so we expect that it has come in on equipment somehow. The import health standard for the importation of equipment is very clear, and it is that no water should be coming in with equipment. Enforcing that in reality can be quite challenging, because this particular clam, the larvae can survive for a period of time in a very small droplet of water. There's a theory going around, and I'm not saying I agree with it or not, that possibly importation of used wakeboarding boats might have been the way it got in. And if you're aware of those boats, many of them do have ballast tanks, and if they're used, they should be empty and dry. But inspecting those completely and being 100% satisfied is quite challenging. Anyway, the border team and the teams responsible for that are reviewing both the standard and the inspection processes in light of the Corbicula response. Two separate species, possibly two separate incursions. likely 2 separate incursions. We don't know exactly how or exactly when. So, my focus is how do we deal with them and how do we contain them. Fluminea, the golden clam in the Waikato River, is a really challenging problem. The Australis at the Wake Park in Taupo, not so much a challenging problem. So we took immediate action with that one, closed the Wake Park down. It's continued to be closed down, and our commitment is to remove that species entirely from that lake, and we're working through that process now. Quite tricky. These are hard things to kill. In particular because they are such prolific breeders, and those larvae just hang around in the water column. And over there we have an artificial lake but fed by groundwater, and it just makes it quite difficult to deal with. But anyway, we have a plan which we'll be executing over the next couple of months to do that, and it will involve a combination of chemical treatment and then carefully filling that pond in. And that will remove the risk from that location at least.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. I take it from what you've said that there's a review going on in relation to the standards relating to border breach.
Yeah.
And it does seem fairly obvious by the nature of the activity occurring in that Taupo park that the sorts of things that would bring them in.
Yeah.
That does seem fairly self-evident. So I'm assuming then that there's going to be a closer look at making sure that there's not a further border breach, because actually it sounds, having one border breach is one thing, but having two is another.
Yeah.
And it does seem that there's obviously a pattern there, and if the pattern keeps being repeated, then while we may be partly successful in containment within our region, we can still expect further border breaches.
Yeah, that's a view. As I say, we don't know how it came in. Most likely on used equipment. They could also have been smuggled in, and these things happen, and we've known them to happen. They could have been in the country for some time, and they could have been in people's aquariums. These things also happen, and we've all had experience of that. However, we do think a border incursion is probably the most likely way that they both got here, and therefore we are taking the sensible steps to review and make changes when necessary. On anything, the border is not impervious, right? We do an extraordinary job in this country, and have done for many years, of maintaining a very biosecure border, but things get through, which is why we have a multi-level system, and why why me and my team exist, and why your biosecurity team exists, because things do occasionally get through the border, despite the most stringent border controls for biosecurity in the world. The only way we can make that border 100% biosecurity proof is not by importing goods or allowing people to come into the country, and clearly we can't do that.
Yeah, that's true, but we also have the other component in this, which is surveillance. And 3 years before it was noticed, it's a very significant time lapse.
Yeah, it is, and I think so. We have made a commitment to standing up a national freshwater surveillance program as a result of that, and so that work is underway at the moment. It will require quite careful design, because we've got a lot of fresh waterways in the country, a lot of things to look for, but that work is underway at the moment. I imagine your staff have already been involved in that already. If they haven't been, they will be soon, and helping to design that. It will be a collaborative effort. And then I just also note that there are a lot of parties that have an interest and responsibility for the Waikato River, and none of us found it earlier than it was found.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Graff, your question?
Yes, thanks. Hello, John. Clark
Morning.
Graff speaking. Just in regard to hornwort, dicot's used for hornwort, the herbicide. is there any pesticide or herbicide being considered for this incursion, Golden Clam?
Yeah, we've looked at the full range of opportunities really, and certainly in a waterway as extensive as the Waikato River, with the volume of water moving through it, the different conditions, etc. The advice that I've had from domestic and international experts is that chemical treatment of any type is not going to be effective. You've also got the challenges. They're called clams for a reason. They clam up and can remain clammed up for a while. And if you have water flow, chemical treatment, that's challenging. It's a slightly different situation in the aquapark, where we will use a chemical treatment. We've got a much more confined space, much shallower and easier to deal with, and we're fairly confident that the chemical treatment will knock back the majority of the clams, in particular those floating in the water column. And then when we fill it in carefully, that will deal with the remainder.
And what chemical treatment is that?
We're likely to use copper sulfate concentrate.
Thanks.
Natural.
Yep.
Councillor Mayor, you got a question?
Yeah, good morning, John Morima. Stu and Bruce have covered a couple of my topics. I just want to just expand on them a little bit. One's the comms around it. Obviously, we're moving into a winter period where we're not going to have a lot of activity on our waterways as such, but just how are you finding a public campaign, just making people aware, and it comes back to the surveillance question as well, and probably that's the Caulerpa incursion as well, but just how active is this public campaign been, and responses back, and then also what else can WRC do in our space? Obviously it's a multi-stakeholder area, but just how can we help more?
Okay, look, appreciate those questions. Yeah, so there's been a huge effort by us and by everybody involved in that public information campaign, and getting the right behaviours, and through all the normal channels that you would use, advertising, public meetings, working with user groups, etc., etc. And look, I think that's gone well. And one, you can always do more, and you guys know that you can tell people, you need to tell people something 6 or a dozen times before it actually sinks in, right? So you've got to keep going at it, and we certainly intend to keep going at it. But look, we've got some useful data out of Bay of Plenty Regional Council and Te Arawa Lakes Trust with the compliance work that they were doing on those lakes over the summer, with a very high knowledge of, and it was in excess of 80%, and I think in excess of 90% of the threat of the clam and what people should be doing. So these were people that were moving from the Waikato region to Bay of Plenty to launch a boat, to fish or jet ski or otherwise cruise around. So that message seems to be getting through, but you've just got to keep going at it, don't you? And in this case, we're going to have to keep going at it perpetually, it would seem. In terms of what you guys can do, look, we've appreciated all the way through the support of your teams and your management, and you have leaned in really well, and have helped lead and support the work that we've been doing. And I think we just need to keep going with that. The critical thing that we're doing now is this transition to a long-term plan, and that's always tricky, but I think we've got lots of collaboration and goodwill going on. I think there was a very useful meeting in Hamilton, I think it was last week, Patrick, wasn't it, that has helped move that forward. We've got to work out, between us and all of the other people involved, roles and responsibilities. That's a critical thing, and then funding. That's also a critical thing, and that's at the moment in our space and in your space is extraordinarily challenging. But to do the work that we want to do to contain the clams to where we currently know it to be, requires all of us to come to the party with funding.
Thanks for that, John, and thanks for the report.
You're welcome.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Noel Smith. On just building on what the questions Bruce asked, and I'm not sure whether your response was directly in relation to the clams, but just on a wider sphere, the border controls. My concern is the next one. We know about these two that you're going to speak to, or are speaking to, but the next one. So this review that's underway, is that for all border incursions, or is that just particular on the likes of the clams? Like if I can just, for example, if someone's bringing in gear, what processes are in place to ensure that that is found as they come through? And I know we've got thousands, hundreds of thousands of people coming through, certainly in the summer at border control, but at what cost and inconvenience to those coming in, as opposed to the cost and inconvenience to the New Zealand environment?
Yeah, well, look, so what I just say at a generic level, the controls that we have at the border are very stringent and the highest and the strongest in the world. New Zealand has operated those restrictions requirements at the border for many years, and we have been extraordinarily successful, I think, generally at keeping biosecurity risk out of the country. The review that we have been doing has been specifically looking at the import health standard for used equipment and around the aspects of it that relate to water on equipment. The standard says 0 water, so that's a pretty good standard. The particular challenge comes to inspection when you're dealing with things that can survive in a drop of water the size of a pinhead. So that becomes really quite challenging, and this is one of the reasons why we have a multi-layered biosecurity system. While we acknowledge that we have to be extraordinarily stringent and rigorous at the border, and we are, but that things can get through the border from time to time. So we have fruit fly incursions. We have all range of incursions that occur from time to time. At the moment, we're managing responses to roughly a dozen new to New Zealand organisms. So these things happen. When something like Corbicula comes along, we take a focused and dedicated look at the border controls, and that's what's going on at the moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. John. Yeah, John, can you continue with your rest of your presentation, please?
Yeah, cool. So shall we turn to Caulerpa, which is also a momentous challenge, and we've been battling that one for 3 years. I'll talk about a couple of things. So you do have Caulerpa in your region. Early on in the response, we found it out at Great Mercury Island, Oahu. It's been an unusual infestation out there. It's not grown material in size. It's sort of shrunk and disappeared from some places, and as a result of that, we've funded a resurvey of Great Mercury Island, which I think was completed just this week. So it's an extensive piece of surveillance around the island, and it's come up with largely the same information that we've had about the infestation out there all the way through. It's relatively small in scale. It has moved a little bit south on the island, but not extensively, and it continues to be very sparse in density. And so this is something that we're learning at other places about Caulerpa. There are some situations where it goes off and it forms these massive, dense, incredibly problematic carpets. There are some other situations where it struggles to survive and certainly struggles to thrive. And that appears to be what we're seeing out at Oahu. So in a sense, you'd have to take that as good news. We'd like it not to be there, but being so far offshore, it's quite a problematic place to deal with it. The other place, the more recent incursion you've had in your region is at Fantail Bay on the Coromandel, which was detected about 3 or 4 weeks ago. The advice that we got at the time from the Auckland University divers that found it there was that it appeared to be a small patch. So we've worked with a whole lot of interested parties and stakeholders, including your staff, to hatch a plan. We've had an outfit called Commercial Dive Services up there over the last week, doing a lot of surveillance work. They have not been able to find any evidence of Caulerpa beyond that one patch that the Auckland Uni divers found, and they have treated that patch. So they've put a benthic mat over it, they've covered it, and they've popped chlorine under it, and that we would expect that Caulerpa to be dead now. So that might mean we have removed Caulerpa from Fantail Bay. There'll need to be some ongoing surveillance, but again, that's good news. On the wider scheme, though, it continues to be a really problematic and worrying incursion. In the places where it is worst, we have many hectares of Caulerpa under dense coverage. So it can be up to 90 to 100% dense, and clearly when you're getting that, it's having some impact on the ecosystem. And endemic species are struggling to survive there. And when you have it on the scale that we have it at places like some of the locations on Great Barrier Island, Te Rāwhiti Cove, that's really quite worrying. The most significant thing we're doing in the Caulerpa space at the moment is this acceleration program, where we received some additional funding to see if we could rapidly enhance some removal technology and surveillance. That's coming to an end late this month, early July. By and large, it has gone well. So the big piece of kit that we wanted to develop is this sort of innovative form of mechanical suction dredging that a team led by Northern Regional Council has been working on. And we've made some really significant improvements in that technology, particularly around the effectiveness of the removal, the amount of Caulerpa that it's getting, that it's pulling out of the water, dealing with the problem of removing sediment from that as it comes out of the water, managing sediment clouds in the ocean, and dealing with the disposal. And we've had some really significant progress in those areas. The bit that we haven't progressed sufficiently yet is the speed at which that can be done, which again relates to the cost effectiveness of what can be done. At the moment, that's costing us, round numbers, 100,000 a hectare to clear. When you're dealing with hundreds of hectares in Te Rāwhiti alone, that cost adds up, doesn't it? So anyway, that work will conclude over the next few weeks. There's another piece of significant work I'll just brief you on quickly, which is we've been trying to find a way to survey faster, more accurately, more cost effectively. That piece of work has also gone well, and we're combining digital surveillance using towed cameras and in particular remote operated vehicles underwater with machine-read real-time diagnosis, and we've got a bit of way to go on that, but that's looking extremely positive. So our ability to find it fast, diagnose it quickly, and to do that cheaply, remove a whole lot of health and safety obstacles with divers in the water, looks like we will make some strong gains there. We'll get out the back of that out of that program at the end of this month, and we will provide advice to our minister on next steps, and so that's our next big milestone.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Mayor.
Yeah, John Warren here again. Hey, that's fantastic news about Fantail Bay, and hopefully that conclusion that it has been eliminated up there so far has come through. I also heard a little bit through some channels on Oahu bay over in Lee there, and apparently they can't find it over there.
Yeah, it's been an interesting one, Warren. Yep.
Just at the end.
Yeah, so that was found initially about 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago by Auckland Council doing some high risk site surveillance there. And you're right. Divers went back, Auckland Council team went back to treat it. They were going to use the same method, cover it and pop chlorine underneath it, supported by Ngāti Manahiri. And yes, they couldn't find it. But the good news is they have since found it. So I don't know if they got the GPS location wrong or not, but they have since found it and it has been treated, and it's and a lot more surveillance in the area, and it's looking a bit like Fantail Bay, looking like it's been found quite early. It doesn't appear to be elsewhere in the immediate vicinity, and we've pretty much killed the patch.
Excellent. It'd be awesome to see some comms around these two results come out.
Yeah.
Just for confidence for our areas, etc., and the fact that if people do see it, if they get onto it quick, then there is treatment that can happen really quickly. Yeah,
good point. I think there's a Caulerpa update going out next couple of days that should have that in it. It's breaking news, by the way. Both of those things have only sort of been confirmed in the last couple of days, so you're amongst the first to hear.
Excellent, thanks for that. And I just a heads up, I have shared some slides and stuff from the Northland project of the dredging and what's going on up there with councillors, so they've got some actual photos of what's happening.
Good. Good. It's quite an impressive piece of kit, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Andrew and the boys are pretty clever up there. So thanks again for your presentation. Yes.
Councillor Smith.
Can I just throw a spanner in the works and ask something completely different? I think we've finished on those two subjects, but are you in a position to give us any 101 on Mycoplasma bovis and the current state of that? Or is that not your?
It's not really my area.
Okay, that's right.
But I can give you a very, very modest update. So you're probably aware that we're moving that program into a national pest management plan. So that's the same form of sort of regulatory management scheme that we're using for Kauri dieback, and that bovine tuberculosis has been managed under for years, and the management of that is moving from us to Osprey. I think we have no infected herds at the moment. There's still very high confidence that we will get rid of M. bovis. Spring's always a worrying time, and spring's just around the corner. But I know the teams have very good processes in place around surveillance and early detection and jumping on anything that might pop up.
Thank you.
Chair Story.
Kia ora. Hi, John. It's Pamela Story here. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate the update on those two matters specifically. I suppose just looking for any commentary you might have, and I know we're still in the middle of both the Corbicula and the Caulerpa issues, but do you have any lessons learned about the engagement processes between Biosecurity New Zealand and regional councils when these types of incursions occur? Any lessons learned on reflection?
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. Good question. Look, clearly, particularly with Corbicula, I don't think we did engage well or effectively. I think we came in too low and too slow. We should have elevated it immediately to chairs and chief executives. So I think we have learnt that lesson. These things can sometimes be challenging to get right when you're in the early stages of a worrying and extraordinarily busy and time pressure response. But clearly that wasn't good enough, and I think we put some processes in to change that. I think with the incursion, the Caulerpa incursion at Fantail Bay, I think we escalated that at all levels within your organisation very rapidly and quickly, and got the right people involved in the management of that.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that. I suppose that we at regional sector have been raising the issue with Biosecurity New Zealand and with the minister around how how effective it can be when biosecurity does work quite closely with the affected regional councils. I do appreciate the kudos that you extended to our team and how we're working with you at this time. But I do think that it's worth stressing that we do have very well-established relationships within our region, whether it's with our local government stakeholders or with our iwi partners. And so really pleased to hear that we've reflected on what we've learned through this process. And I do hope that we have that we've worked on agreements between our organizations around those processes. But thank you very much, John, for making yourself available today.
No, you're welcome. I'll just make one more comment on that, if that's okay, in terms of agreement. So you might not be aware, but between ourselves, regional councils and Department of Conservation, we've been working on a new memorandum of understanding about the way we collaborate and work together. And that's coming to its final stages, and I think is going through a ratification process at the moment with councils. That'll be really helpful. You know, it will refresh the formal arrangements we have working between each other. That said, these things are only as good as the implementation of them, aren't they?
I agree, but thank you. I'm pleased to hear that we're close to signing those off. And again, thank you very much for making yourself available to our council and to our councillors, just to ensure that everybody's had an opportunity to ask the questions that are burning in their constituents' minds. So really appreciate your availability.
You're welcome anytime.
Yeah, thank you, John. And I've, as the constituent, or Robert Cookson, constituent council of Waihao, we've got real concerns that we don't get it in our catchment of the Piako and Waihao rivers. So as a infrastructure of flood protection on those two catchments, it's going to be, we'd hopefully keep it out of there in the near future. But it's going to be education, I believe, that helps to keep it away from us. Is those water users on the Waikato River must be educated of how their responsibilities of keeping it out of other catchments. So I just hope that message keeps going forward and keeps going through, that it's the users of the water that's going to have to protect it, and their own responsibilities of using those waterways. You're going to have to protect the other waterways as well in the region. So I'd just like to thank you for your presentation, John, and your time today. It's amazing. And as a council, we really appreciate you having the time to speak to us today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I think Warren and Diana, thank you. All in favour? Against? Gary, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, so next item is on our Biodiversity Partnerships Program, and I'd like to welcome Nikki Ismay to the table. Another new face for you today, possibly, as our Biodiversity Partnerships lead. So welcome, Nikki. Look, in the biodiversity space, I know certainly coming out of the long-term plan, there's been a lot of discussion around the Natural Heritage Partnership Program and the kind of work that is done under that. The purpose of this item is to give you some insights into the other aspect of our biodiversity program, which is around our partnerships and the work that we're doing in the community. You'll see that there's some great case studies that have been provided with this item, and Nikki is going to take you through some further details on those.
Morena koutou, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to highlight the program that we are running under the Biodiversity Partnerships Unit. And I'm going to take the report as read, but I guess it's important to say that the unit that we're talking about today is one aspect of the biodiversity team, and all of our biodiversity programs do have partnerships threads running through them, but this is specifically to do with the partnerships program of works. So I know that you've all heard a lot recently about the Natural Heritage Partnership Program, and really the main thing that I hoped that you get out of today is that is really just to highlight that the partnerships work extends well beyond that of being a fund manager. We do a lot of other things in the biodiversity community as well as operating as a fund manager. Have we got the slide? Oh, great, thank you. So I just wanted to spend 10 minutes running through some of the case studies that are in the attachment to the report. And they just demonstrate the different categories of partnerships work and how it's applied in a practical setting. So there's 5 main categories of work that we undertake. The first is leadership and activation of initiatives. The second is as a supporter of initiatives. The third is the very familiar funding partner. The fourth is collaboration and education, and particularly as that relates to policy and planning. And I'll give you an example of that further into the presentation. And the last one is around advocacy, education and training. Next slide, thank you. So the case study that we chose for the category of work that is under leadership and activation of initiatives is one that you might be familiar with, and that is the collective impact for biodiversity in the Waikato project. It's been underway for a few years now, and it would be fair to say that it was a little slow to start and get going, but we really have some great momentum building now, and so it's a pretty exciting time for this project. The aim of the Collective Impact Initiative is to respond to the needs of the biodiversity community. So a steering group has been in place for some time, and more recently we have collected together a community representatives working group, and the two are working really closely together now, which is great. What that means is that we can actually make sure that the priorities for this project have been informed and driven by the community that we're hoping to serve. So that's great news. From a meeting that we had late last year with the community working group, 4 key priorities for this project were identified. And I'll just talk to or touch on 2 of those this morning. So the first priority is a centralised data reporting and monitoring platform. And we are currently scoping that out so that we can develop a solution for the community to be able to collate all the data on the work that they're undertaking. And we need it to be scalable, we need it to be cost effective, we need it to be flexible, and we also need it to be able to collect data at a regional scale, at a sub-regional scale, at a group or at a project scale. So not only is this going to be really useful for the community biodiversity groups so that they can demonstrate the work that they're undertaking, the outcomes and the outputs, but also for council to be able to have a clearer understanding of what's happening as a whole in the biodiversity community work, and to really get a better understanding of the return on investment. The second priority that we're working on is to support greater alignment of biodiversity funding, and that was identified as key for community group. I think we all understand many of the challenges that community are facing with funding, and we've started with a phasing in of the new approach to the small scale community initiatives fund, which I know many of you will be familiar with that change, whereby we are going to phase in distributing some of those funds to community sub-regional hubs for distribution. The community groups are very excited about this initiative. We actually have a meeting next Tuesday, and they will be helping us to co-design the operational delivery of it. And we've also had at least one external funder who's indicated to us that once we've started this phasing in, they may be interested in joining the approach. So that's also great news. Next slide. So the second category is around being a supporter of initiatives that others are undertaking. And an example of this is that we, in the partnerships unit, sit on the steering group of the Central Waikato Predator-Free Hub, and we provide strategic and operational guidance via that steering group. We do also provide funding to the Central Waikato Predator-Free Hub through the Environmental Initiatives Fund, but this is just an extra layer of activity. Next slide. So this is one, as I said, that we're all very familiar with. So I won't go into too much detail except to say that we're currently supporting around 60 projects via 3 funds. And in addition to the funding, we do actually provide technical support, strategic support, and governance support to many of these groups. In the report, we highlighted just 3 of the groups, 1 for each category of funding. And I thought that you might be interested to see a very short 2-minute video on one of the groups that we're funding via the Natural Heritage Fund, which is Bush to Burbs.
Landowners on board with the concept of predator control between Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari and Leamington.
Several of the species are doing extremely well at Sanctuary Mountain Maungatautari. We are starting to get quite high populations of birds and they are moving into the surrounding areas. So it's really important that everyone gets involved and helps to create predator-free 2050.
We receive funding from the Natural Heritage Fund from the Waikato Regional Council for traps for landowners. Trapping in remnant bush alongside waterways and newly planted areas is the focus. This is the habitat our native birds and bats are using, and it's also where the predators are most likely to be too. Allowing the safe passage from the Monga all the way to Cambridge is the goal of Bush to Burbs, and there's great work being done by Predator-Free Cambridge in reserves and by backyard trappers.
So not only do we work with communities in urban settings, but Bush to Burbs is a great example of how rural communities come together for our environment.
So it's been a really great place to actually get to know your neighbour. Like, we met Paul through the Trap Act because there was the 180 traps. We've also now met all our other neighbours because we're now talking about what baits to use and what are the best traps, and we're sharing ideas.
I wanted to try and make a difference to ensure that there was safe habitat for native birds for breeding.
We all only have a limited amount of time on the planet, and I'm just always keen to leave every area we've lived in better than it was when we came.
Big thing in Te Ao Māori is called tahitanga, unity, coming together as one to achieve a common goal. So it's a restoration of mātauranga knowledge, it's a restoration of history, and whanaungatanga coming together.
I think the most exciting goal is to get the birds that are on the mountain now, like the tomtits and the stitch birds, into our gardens would be awesome.
We've got kaka on our farm. I know Paul's got robins nesting on his farm, and it's really important that the spillover from Maungatautari Mountain is protected by the nearby farms.
And it doesn't take very long to see a huge difference.
Caretakers for future generations, really.
I'd say come on in, it's great.
Whether you're setting 1 trap or 2 traps, you're helping towards the bigger picture. Eh? We're all working to achieve something, but then when we come together, it's much easier, isn't it?
So I think for me, that video really demonstrates not only how we can deliver landscape scale outcomes via community initiatives such as this project's actually connected into 2 other large projects in the area, so they're really getting great coverage, but also something that I'm personally really passionate about, which is about how communities can connect together through this work. So we're actually delivering on more than one of our priorities, not just about biodiversity and biosecurity, but also about connecting into communities. And that's really another very, very piece that is at the heart of what the Partnerships Unit does. So with the Environmental Initiatives Fund, I just wanted to highlight the Karakia Timatanga project. And this project aims to produce both environmental outcomes and also social outcomes. So this project engages with at-risk youth, should I say. And the aim of the project is to help them to develop skills in predator control, and then also to get them connected into community work so that they're giving back into their communities. Next slide. And the final one in the funding partner space is a individual, Rain Williams, who's working in the Coromandel on 54 hectares. This is a really good example of how a small amount of funding can leverage landscape scale outcomes. So Rain is working with around 11 landowners, and she also is involved in lots of other projects. And there's also funding coming from the individual landowners. So not only are we putting in a small bit, but a lot of the landowners are actually investing themselves as well. Next slide. So the fourth area of work or category of work is under the collaboration and education. And as I said, this is particularly as it applies to policy and planning. So an example of this is the Waikato Bat Alliance. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that, but it's a multi-agency group which was formed about 4 years ago. And the partnerships unit was integral in forming this group alongside our planning colleagues. The aim is twofold, really. One is to foster knowledge sharing, and the other is to develop tools which will enable planners and policymakers to incorporate biodiversity or a biodiversity lens into their policy settings. So I'm sure many of you will know that, for example, territorial authorities have limited biodiversity experts in their planning and policy space. And one of the things that we've done, which is actually due to be released before the end of this month, so very soon, is a spatial mapping tool. And that can be used by territorial authority planners and policymakers so that they can apply that biodiversity knowledge and lens. And it's specifically, in this case, around bat habitat and bat ecology. So there's 4 layers. It has shows different areas where bats are roosting or travelling in the central Waikato district. And as I say, it's another tool for policy and planners. We also have undertaken workshops for territorial authorities, for arborists, particularly those that are contracting to territorial authorities, so that when they're working in that space, they have an oversight of the biodiversity that might be there. And we're looking to extend this model out to other highly vulnerable species or highly mobile species. It's something that is quite unique. We have not heard of anything else like this around the country, and I was in Wellington at an event several months ago, and there was quite a lot of interest in applying this to biodiversity and planning and policy. Next slide. So the last area of work is quite wide-ranging, and that is under advocacy, education and training. And this would be our bread and butter. This is what we're doing all the time. There's many ways that our unit gets involved in working alongside the community in this space. One example would be our involvement in the Waikato Biodiversity Forum. And in addition to providing funding to this forum, we also provide strategic and operational support. The Biodiversity Forum is intended to be there for the community, by the community, working in conservation. And they hold regular events with the aim of not only upskilling and disseminating knowledge to the biodiversity community, but also giving them an opportunity to get together, to network and share their own knowledge. And I know that that's really highly valued, because often people are working in their own little space without really a great opportunity to get together with others and learn from each other. Just as an example, the last 2 events that have been held, we held a landscape scale event out at Maunga Tautiri, and there were over 100 biodiversity community members attending that. And then more recently, we held one in the Matamata Piako district around connecting people with biodiversity projects, and we had about 60 community groups attend that. So that's the end of my presentation. It's just a small selection of the work that we're undertaking in the Biodiversity Partnerships program. Every piece of work that we undertake is always contributing towards biodiversity and biosecurity or community connections, and we always have that focus in our minds with every piece of work that we do. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Graff.
Oh, thank you. Page 25, I just noticed there that there's bush to burbs. In that example there's bait stations 163. You know what toxins used in those bait stations?
I could find that information out for you, but I don't have it.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, that'd be good. Just my
bush
point
to
is,
burbs?
yes, page 25. a little map there. My point being that I think probably a lot of people probably aren't aware that apart from ferritox, if ferritox is used, which is cyanide-based product, which is perfectly fine for carcasses to be left out in the field, etc. But if it's some other thing, which is anticoagulants, which is often used, the animal becomes a pathway for the toxin to come out of the bait station into the carcass, and it's a transfer of the poison because the poison is still persistent in the environment. So my other question would be, do you know if if it's not ferritox, do you know if the carcasses within these community projects are being collected, buried, removed, or do you know if they're just left in the environment? Thanks.
I can check specifically on that example. More generally, many of the programs that we support are around trapping. So obviously, if the carcasses are left,
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And but with regard to these, there's 163, which is about a quarter of the methods used. But that's good. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Can we just go back to the picture with the bat, please? That one there. That looks like a pine tree. I'm concerned that having been in the development of and chaired the Waikato District Appeals Committee in relation to the proposed district plan, bats, I was going to say can drive you batty, but and they really can, insofar as we've got a walkway nearby where an ecologist came and said, oh, this might be a bat habitat, a roost or whatever it's called. And so therefore that's concerned for the development of the walkway because the council wants trees removed, but nobody knows. And what I'm concerned about and would like to understand a bit more of is the spatial planning layers developed by the Bat Alliance. What's the purpose of that? What safeguards are there, unless something's proved to me and it actually exists? Should it be on the landowner or should it be on whoever's putting this on a piece of paper to prove that the bats are actually there for it to be used? So what is the purpose of this? And it's probably for another day, but the reality is bats are great, but just saying that they might be there, it's not good enough. So is this actual mapping based on absolutely recorded, right? And what is the purpose of then having mapped it?
So there is no regulatory purpose to it. So I'm not a planning or policy expert, so I can give you a bit of an overview, but it is really for information only. So it is getting planners and policymakers to start thinking about the biodiversity that is in the areas that they're working in as they're making planning and policy decisions, but there is no regulatory requirement for them to use that beyond from an information perspective. There are other regulations that are outside the scope of what we do that would require them to do or not do things in relation to bats.
I suppose the wider, with the more and more farms being converted to forestry and the greater chances of bats establishing on forestry, what is actually going to happen if bats are identified? So it's not for today probably, this discussion, but it's.
And just to note that this work that's been done is just for the central Waikato region. So really it's focused around the Hamilton City District and surrounding Waipa. It's really that sort of from the airport out to Hakarimata sort of scope.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Mayor.
Thanks, Robbie. Awesome to hear about these hubs being developed, and I know it was the theme that came through, and quite a lot of our submitters to the long-term plan were quite interested in that. So could you keep me up to date where that's going. I don't want to interfere with it or anything like that, but just from the Coromandel, obviously I have a lot of groups that are interested in where that will sit. And then the other thing is awesome also to hear that it looks like we'll be able to leverage more funding out of those sort of arrangements. So that's fantastic. So excellent. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd just like to second what Warren said. If there was meetings that are going on in our constituency, I'd like to be invited along to come along and listen to what's been said, if that's a possibility. Just because I've got interest to who is of my community, who's involved. Otherwise, I don't know. So yeah, I welcome you bringing that, inviting councillors to the ones that are participating in their own electorates. So that'd be great. Thank you. Stu, Councillor Kneebone, sorry.
I prefer Stu, don't worry. First thing I was just going to say is thanks a lot, Nikki, for this report. It's really good. And rather than have it every once a term and near the end of the term, we should just have a little bit each meeting. You know, I think that would be a much better way of keeping everyone up to speed with what's going on, because as we've seen, there is a truckload of stuff going on. I mean, for example, the priority possum control scheme, that could be one for the next agenda item, just 10 minutes on that so everyone's aware of what's going on there and all that sort of stuff. So, but really enjoyed it. Thanks, Nikki. Noel sort of refreshed a little bit of an observation I've made with the bats, and that I think, again, not for today, that the we as a council should probably need to address, and that is that if an individual decides to drop an old man pine tree, he just goes and does it and no one's none the wiser. It may or may not have bat habitat. If an old man pine tree happens to be somewhere where there's a consent application for something else that's going on, they get sucked into this quite expensive process to establish whether or not there's bats there. And it's quite unfair, and that, if you know what I mean, it's not even, and I think it's something we need to address, because I've had a few grumbles from people who have been in that situation where there's one old man. There's a lot of those old lonely old man pines where I am, and it's quite an imposition, and they spend a lot of money in consultants, and often there might not even be if they don't find bad habitat, it's all fine, but there's a lot of expense incurred to get to that point. So yeah, I do agree with Noel. It's something we should address and try and make it a little bit fair. And look, I don't have the answers for it, but it's quite wrong that an individual can go and drop an old tree for firewood and not get hooked into that process when they may well be doing more damage than someone who has gone through the process and incurred a whole bunch of expense and hasn't found anything. So yeah, just as I say, just for another day. Yeah, but no, thanks for the report, Nikki.
Yeah.
I'll just add on to what you said, Stu. I was hoping to have a 5-minute discussion at the end of this item of what we'd like to see in this area over the next meetings. So we already so what you're talking about is exactly what I've sort of on the agenda. So, okay. Councillor Clarkson, thank you.
Oh yeah, look, thanks. I just wanted to thank Nikki for the energy that she's put into this role. So the collective impact process has been going on for many years. And I also wanted to thank all of the people who've contributed to that, because I think we talk a lot about the multiplier effect in terms of funding. There's another multiplier effect going on. It's a really important multiplier effect, and that is that a good range of, I would say, community leaders and technical support agencies, including the Department of Conservation, universities, all sorts of technical expertise, is offered to this process completely free. And so what is going on is another sort of multiplier effect. And most importantly, the building of communities, building of social cohesion, building of resilience to prevention of change coming on from other aspects like climate change, all that sort of stuff. It's all part of this bigger picture. It's not just about the biodiversity and the species. It's way broader than that. And I also wanted to use this opportunity to thank Trust Waikato, for example, who has actually invested money in this process in order to get us to where we are today. So I think it's really important that we recognise as councillors and as council that all of these other people have been giving all of this to us And what it is actually assisting us to do, most importantly, is for us to take on our regional leadership role, because this is the space where, in relation to these statutes, we have a major regional leadership role, and we need to be in there, and even more so nowadays because of the withdrawal of funding and support that's going on at the moment at Central. This is true localism, you know. This is about. There are other sorts of localism. That's when you give the job to someone else and don't give them any funding to go with it, right? But this is true localism. Is at the end of the day, all of this, the culmination of all of this is essentially local communities taking responsibility for their own environment and not sort of always looking elsewhere and saying, oh, they're not helping us or they're not. It's actually about us doing what we need to do in our region. So I just wanted to thank Nikki in particular because, you know, having brought her in and of course the people who appointed her, Patrick and Greg and co, who've seen this important need and been able to get a focus on this aspect of the way we operate as a council. I think it can only lead to great things. And I'm really looking forward to just regular updates, Robbie. It's like, that's all it's about, really. If we just have more regular updates on where things are heading and and particularly not focusing on looking for good news stories either. You know, what are the things we're learning along the way? What are the things that can be improved? But then to use this also in some effective media releases which demonstrate what we're doing as a council, you know, how we are becoming regional leaders and the impact that's having on the outcome that's being sought, which is reversal of biodiversity decline. Thank you.
I totally agree with what you said, Patrick. Sorry, Bruce, but I think we want to know the failures as well. It's really important that we know where we've made mistakes and that we're going to change and do things better. So totally agree with what you said, Bruce. Patrick, you want to say something?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. There is one thing I wanted to say, and that is, so you recall, some of you have done 2 LTPs where we've put biodiversity business cases up, but inside those business cases, we've colour-coded areas we wanted to invest in or we're recommending investing in. And in 2021, the focus was on leadership. And 2 major parts of investment came out of that. One was Nikki's position coming in. And again, this is a direct result of that. And the second one was the investment in a senior position in Tracy's directorate to help develop the biodiversity quarter and the biodiversity strategy. And that is, again, it is to show strong regional leadership in this area. So it's a great result to be able to come back and say, actually, that investment is really bearing fruit. So yeah, thank you.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, look, just building on Bruce's words, Robbie and I and Greg were chatting some months ago, and we were concerned about biodiversity and its role within the organisation and the role within this committee. And I know Robbie and I both thought that it wasn't being given the prominence, understanding, commitment, or the perception was that it wasn't. And so I congratulate Robbie for taking the initiative to bring it to the front of the agenda and to bring these topics forward, and congratulate you and your team, Patrick, for putting this on the table today. I think for me, this is starting to get to the right space for this committee and for this council, because and this is my view, that biodiversity is tucked away a little bit and we haven't seen much of it in these agendas. So really good to see it, and really pleased to see that Stu and others and Bruce want to see more of this on the agenda and more regularly. And Nikki, to your passion, obviously, coming through. Great work. So look, I think onwards and upwards. Thank you.
Any other questions? We got I'd just like to say something for a second. Thank you, Nikki and Patrick, for the papers, and being very informative. And that's what we need. We need to be informed, that we understand what biodiversity is and what we want out of it for our region, because otherwise we're just governors here just ticking, tick, 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 tick. And we've got to be informed and we've got to be in a learning process ourselves. So we're actually getting educated here as well. I think that then we can make better decisions. Only one thing I'd say in the paper is my little thing is bio what's the insects? Biocontrols. I'd like you to spend a little bit more time maybe talking to Fonterra and go to like Friday Pie Days are huge in Fonterra and Farm Source now. Like they'll buy thousands and tens of thousands of pies throughout New Zealand to get farmers to come into a Farm Source day on a Friday. Maybe that's just something for one staff member or some brochures to be left in the stores to, hey, why don't we do that? You know, maybe it just opens the door that we do a bit more of that in that space. That's just as a farmer speaking, so it's not as the chair. I just think it's something just to think about. So thanks very much, and I really appreciate the paper and your time and effort today. It's amazing. So, and hopefully this continues in the future. So I think we're going to have a little discussion afterwards about what we want to see in the next agenda for a couple of minutes. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm always happy to come in and talk about the work that we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, and Anna, all in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Cheers. So, yeah, how would we like to just talk on that for a second, Greg? Sure. Yeah, or you? All right. So just ideas of what you'd like to see in the next agenda. I know it's going to be a couple of months away, but it's just, is there anything we want to dive deep on and get it that we can, Patrick?
I just wonder if Greg might be able to outline what's already on, like, because we've already got some things that might answer, like the annual report for biosecurity, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, so next meeting is September, and it is I guess an end of year meeting for us. So it's the time that we've had to wrap up our programs for this current financial year. So you'll be receiving reports across the board from ICM in terms of the end of year outcomes, and in particular the biosecurity program. There is you should describe it as compulsory end of year wrap up for that program as well as the year ahead for biosecurity. What I did hear from Councillor Kneebone was possibly a focus on the PPCA program.
That was just, I just noticed it was one of the ones that wasn't covered in here, which is absolutely fine, but I was just making the point that rather than have a presentation like I don't mean rather than, but in addition to what we've had today, it'd be kind of good just to have a little bit each meeting, because it sort of struck me that we probably went into the LTP with a lot of the newer councillors not really understanding what our programs were, which is never a good way to enter into a budgeting process. So I'm saying, hey, there's the PPCA program's a good example of one you could bring to the next meeting, because if I said to half the councillors around this table, tell me about the PPCA program, yeah, there you go. And fair call, because it's never come up around the table. I know about it because I've been here for too bloody long, but yeah.
The other thing to highlight is we've got another meeting end of October. This would normally be reserved for EIF decisions. Obviously that's changed now, but we're looking to, in terms of that decision sitting with staff, but we're looking to reimagine that particular meeting to do a bit of a showcase on the EIF program that we have. So that's for the end of October. I think it's end of October.
Yeah, the idea was to actually bring some of the bigger groups back to actually come and talk to the committee. Yeah, which is pretty cool. We haven't done it. COVID pretty much nailed it for a couple of years. So I think it'd be that the groups really love coming and talking about their programs, and we've invested a lot of money in them. So I think that was I guess the idea.
Bruce,
I'd just like to add to Stu's comment about the priority possum scheme, because I think another thing I'd like to see happen more often is some real focus on trying to look for the synergies between biosecurity and biodiversity work. So just recently there was an event held in Ngaruahia by the predator-free hub people and a guy, Greg, who runs the Hakarimata predator control program. He's a guy that lives adjoining the range and is doing a lot of work actually on the area at the, I would say, the western flank of the Hakaramata. And it's the classic example of people not necessarily knowing what the bigger picture is about, what's going on in relation to possum control in the broader region and the individual projects that are operating in some parts of that same region who don't even know where it all fits together. So, these guys are over there doing all the possum control and predator control over there and had never heard of the Priority Possum Program, which actually abuts right onto the edge of where they're trying to do their work. So I'm just asking for, when reports like this come to us, can we take that broader view? Can we consider how does the biosecurity component fit with the biodiversity component, and don't just keep it in silos, because that's the other thing about an integrated catchment management program. We've got some papers coming up shortly today, which also present all sorts of amazing integration opportunities. And I think we've still got this tendency to operate as though one thing works for this in this way and the other bits are different, but they're not actually. They're all fully interconnected. Anyway, that's just a sort of an observation about how we might want to continue this process of, when we're doing the reporting, focusing in on looking for the opportunities to integrate.
I agree. Yep, totally agree, Bruce. Any other questions? No, one idea I did have, and I don't know if it's possible or not, so I'm just in my own personal capacity, I'm saying this, not as the chair, is actually maybe take councillors on the road and see some of the outcomes and great things we're getting, because there's a whole lot of education in actually seeing it happen, and I don't know if councillors would like to do that or not. But if there's, I know Councillor Downer's always saying there's things need doing in Taupo. Why can't we go down to Taupo and see what's actually been accomplished down there sometimes as well? That may be a good idea. I don't know how councillors feel about that, but that's just another idea I've had, is maybe we take ICM on the road and have any if it's only one meeting a year or something, maybe, but it's just an idea. I don't know if that can work, but it's just an idea. So thank you.
Yeah, look, thanks, committee members. I think there's enough to kickstart some ideas there. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. So we'll move on to the next adoption of the West Coast Coastal Plan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I welcome Grant and Paul to the table to talk about light review of our West Coast catchment zone plan. For those around the table who have been around for a while, you may recall where these plans have come from, I guess back in the days of catchment committees. And this is a timely review just to make sure that this particular zone plan is up to date with where things are at. And speaking to Councillor Clarkson's point before, these zone plans are an ideal vehicle to really integrate what we do across all of our activities as council. And this is looking beyond ICM as well, and you'll see some broad recognition in this plan. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, morning, members of the committee. I don't want to cut across Paul's presentation, but the zone plans, just very briefly, there's 8 zones. They all have zone plans. They're non-statutory documents that pull together all the relevant information in relation to catchment river work and helps us set our priority actions for which priority catchments in terms of funding in those catchments. It's pretty much in a nutshell what they are. As soon as the ink dries on them, of course, they do become a little bit out of date. So you have iwi environmental plans, you have updated regional plans, you have district council non-statutory documents or district plans or whatever they might be. So the Lite plan is a way of just updating that information, updating those priorities between a major review. Major review includes going out to communities and whatever else it might be. But the Lite review is something much lighter, given its name. So it is a bit of an update, and I'll pass to Paul. Kerry is in the room. Kerry is a Waipa West Coast Zone Manager prior to Paul and was involved in the development of the review as well. I'll pass to Paul and we can have questions later, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant, and thank you very much, committee. Fair to say Grant's just done most of my presentation, so I'll get through this very quickly. Next slide, please. So yeah, each of the 8 management zones around the region does have a zone management plan. It's really the tool for the implementation of the river and catchment management activities. They're non-statutory, there's no rules or requirements in there on landowners, but it is a good internal policy document for council staff, just directing us to those areas, to that type of work that has been agreed with those communities. And because it is the voluntary type sort of work, because it is a non-statutory approach, very much relies on that collective action for implementation. Getting those stakeholders involved, getting those landowners involved, getting the agencies involved, and working together to fully implement the potential opportunities in the zone plans. As you move around the zones, each zone plan will follow a similar sort of structure. We'll have an overall high-level vision for the zone, strategy to achieve that vision, and then you move down to some more of the practical activities to implement that strategy, service levels, performance standards, and the financial strategies and funding arrangements. So each zone plan will cover a similar sort of structure, but will be sort of tailored and has been developed based on those individual zones. In this particular case, we're just talking about the West Coast Zone Plan. It was developed and approved in 2016 by the then West Coast Catchment Committee. That was a subcommittee of council made up of 18 members. So we had 7 landowner community reps, 3 from the district council, regional council reps, 3 iwi reps. And so they developed that original zone plan for the West Coast. And it's been the guiding document to date. And as Grant's mentioned, this is just a light review of that original zone plan. This diagram just highlights where the zone plan sits relative to other regional national policy. It is a non-statutory document. And so there's a lot of other plans, policies that direct or feed into advise the zone plan itself. And from the zone plan, that helps the river and catchment teams deliver those work programs, those stakeholder partner projects, community projects. And just noting there, one of the actions from the current West Coast Zone Plan was the development of the Harbour catchment plans. That's the next item on the agenda. And I guess it's worth noting at this point, whilst the zone plan is a non-regulatory plan, the actions that come out of the zone plan are expected to be well beyond any regulatory requirement. So it doesn't impose any additional restrictions on landowners, but certainly if we're getting involved in funding or anything like that, the expectation is what is delivered is well beyond regulatory requirements. Because this is just a light review, the original vision and goals that were agreed through that catchment subcommittee have remained unchanged, and we have reviewed the actions, the implementations based on the knowledge we have to hand and the with those original vision and goals in mind. Into 2021, the regional prioritisation strategy framework was developed. We've been able to update our priority areas and that based on that work. And again, likewise, the Lite review has taken that into account. We had a briefing with our constituent councillors 7th of May just to explain the changes that were being done. We did send out a tracked changes version, although acknowledging that because it was full track changes, it was very difficult to follow and comprehend. But in the interest of transparency, it was there for our constituent councillors to see. And again, with this light review of the zone plan, there's no implications with regard to the present funding nor rating levels. this is about the working with our stakeholders and communities. So next steps, approval of the text within the zone plan. That's sort of what has brought us here today. On the basis that does happen, we'll then be able to finalise the zone plan with our communications team, get the formatting correct, and get it published and available for the community and the team to use as a resource. The intent being a full review, which will also look at the vision and the goals in partnership with communities and stakeholders. And at the moment that is scheduled for 2026. So, thank you very much.
Councillor Clarkson got in first.
Right. Beat him, did I? Yeah, I've just got a question about whether in a plan of this style, the Lite plan, a map of the catchment groups that are in operation across the zone, is that part of the process? Or because recently Noel and I went to a meeting in the Tikaraka Lodge, wasn't it? Up at Waikato too?
West Waikato Central Community Catchment Group.
Yeah, and they've just established a new one. And I think the most important piece of information I'd be looking for in this process would be, where are these catchment groups? Because they are a massive vehicle for making the changes that you're trying to signal even in a Lite plan. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you raise a good point. There are at least 2 other websites I know that try to map catchment groups and care groups and things, which they do become out of date as groups grow and then fade. So there are other websites you can go to look for that information. Doesn't mean we couldn't have a map in this plan. It would become out of date quite quickly.
Councillor Smith.
Just building on that group is started about 18 months ago, not long after the council was established. Robin Broughton is their secretary, manager, whatever. And they've brought what I think there was over 100 farms, and it stretches from just below Port Waikato to just above Whangaroa, Raglan Harbour, and comes right back into, they're hoping to get Wainara involved, but 2 staff members, Jenna Lucy and Teresa Horan, I believe, also attended with us. Certainly they were on the email, and there were 2 of them there. But these catchment groups, I think, this is in this area, takes in probably half that West Coast area. So I think Bruce's point is who's involved, and I've shared this part of the agenda with Robin, and she was going to come back to me, and they're looking forward to basically having an approved document. And they've got several $100,000 from MPI, was it? Yeah, or MB, one of the 2, for 3-4 years work in the catchment. So, and of course they said to us that they're looking to leverage the new Heritage Fund and the likes, the enhanced Heritage funding. So it's good to see these people taking responsibility in the area, and again, the leveraging through ourselves and other organisations and government agencies will enhance that catchment incredibly. So, and all the catchment runs to the sea. It does not run to a river, which is different to most of our other catchments. So it was a good day. Thank you.
Councillor Nebo.
Yeah, no, thanks, Paul. No, this was good. Just a comment and a question. It talks in the document about 1 million tonnes of annual sediment loss in there, which is a lot of sediment, and I don't doubt that in any way, shape, or form. The bit that I found really interesting was the 2017 riparian survey results. It says that 28% of the riparian bank length within the zone is adequately fenced. That doesn't quite feel right to me. I've flown over it in an aeroplane a number of times, and I just wondered if you guys knew what the what they classify as adequately fenced, because even, to be honest, the ones, I haven't seen the latest Whitehall one they've done, but the previous one seemed, again, a bit over generous, but just wondered if you had any sort of commentary on how they categorise that 28%, what the criteria. That's not the vibes you get when you drive around down there, are they? Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just through the chair. Oh, I won't kneel. So that's a random selection of streams across the zone, and it does range. It does vary heavily across the zone. So in some catchments, there's less than 10%. So SPY undertakes this work, our science team, and then it's weighted, of course, by catchments like Whaingaroa that have close to 80-90% of riparian fencing in the lower areas. So it's an average across the zone, but they are randomly selected, and they've first to fifth order streams. So it should be accurate. They have a really large sample size.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
but it does essentially mean that stock are effectively permanently excluded. So it could just be for that type of animal, a one-wire electric, and there's signs that that stock aren't getting through and damaging the riparian areas. Yeah, okay. But it may only be a metre back as well.
Yeah, okay, yeah, because I mean, yeah, you do see, and there's a classic one between 8 Mile Junction and Pew Pew where the one wire just about in the Bloomin' River, so that could potentially meet this as criteria as well, could it?
Yeah, they do note amount of riparian damage and erosion caused by stock. We actually intend to present this at an upcoming meeting, don't we, the riparian characteristics survey, to give councillors more detail on how that's changed over time and where we're seeing improvements and deterioration.
Yeah. Okay, no, thanks, Kerry. Yeah. And the only other comment, which was just a bit of a general one, which applies to the harbour and catchment plans as well, it just seems to me that when there's a number of documents from our various stakeholders, airway environmental management plans and things like that, how onerous is it to update these when those documents change? Because I guess where I'm going is to just ensuring that we're writing the documents in a way that it doesn't become too onerous to keep them up to date, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so just through the chair, those documents, like the iwi environmental management plans, they haven't really changed since publication. So we're still referring to those original 2016 in the case of Ngāti Hakairo 2005. Yeah. So that's not too onerous, to be fair. Yeah. It's just bringing in any new work, like Raglan naturally had done their plan for the harbour, the Waikato Regional Council's strategic direction that gets updated, so we ensure that we're aligned with that. So I think the Lite review is useful. It's not a big piece of work, but it just brings in the few that have been updated.
Yeah. Thank you. Cheers, Paul.
Councillor Dunbar-Smith.
Yeah, just in relation to new work, Council hears about things like SPAT for the West Coast and also offshore wind. Are these considered as part of this review? Have there been any feedback on it?
So it's the catchments down to the harbours. It's not the coastal marine area as such. So it's the harbours and the land that feeds into them. So everything else is kind of considered with the coastal plan.
Okay, thank you. So if you're looking at SPAT, even if it's in a harbour, it's coastal plan, not this.
Sorry, just to clarify, I'm not sure if it's a coastal plan, but it's not this plan. I mean, it depends what your specific question is.
I was just wondering if it had come up because we hear about it coming through council as issues and wondered if it was considered as part of the Lite review.
No. Right. This is about catchment. This is about actions in catchments to improve water quality and biodiversity outcomes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Not about the coastal surface water or the harbour management per se.
Thank you. Councillor Mahuta, got a question?
Kia ora. Firstly, thank you for the work done on the plan. I was here when we got the first one out, so really glad that it's got some years under it now. Probably keen to understand how we keep the community around this plan with us, because if it needs stakeholders, before we had a catchment committee, how do we intend to do that? I'm probably not asking staff, I'm asking council. How are we going to show up on the coast with this planning and engender community support of the other councils and communities? Before they had a member on a catchment committee, what are we willing to do instead of that? Or what are we considering? Just through my catchment chairs. But thank you for the work. Totally, really appreciate it. I think it's job well done. Kia ora.
Can I just answer that initially? Tipper, I don't know whether you heard that I've shared this with our newly formed West Waikato catchment, which takes from
Thank you.
Raglan Harbour through to Port Waikato. So, and inland through the catchments, obviously, that feed into the sea and the harbour. So at this stage, working with them and relying on their feedback.
And I've been attending the Kawhia one too. So there's an active community in Kawhia and same in Raglan. But I'm just saying, what's our plan? Because it's still informal. In 2 years' time, we've done nothing to generate the community around the new plan. I totally support what you're saying, Noel, but what's our concerted effort on the West Coast? Again, they seem to be, often last in our whakaaro because of the number of, I guess, the small scale of the catchment. But I just want to know that we're building up there, because, again, I'm imagining in the next period there we will show up and say, look, we're ready to do some stuff. Who's ready to partner with us? And we've just done nothing to knit the community together. Not nothing, but we've been a little bit passive. So kia ora. So I'm not asking staff this either. I'm just saying, as governors, what do we think? Kia ora.
Yeah, I think that's just a discussion that we all got to sit down and have as councillors together and decide what that is. Because the committees were only approved by all of council.
Can I ask Greg, if you don't mind, Bruce, your thoughts on this, because these communities want to partner with us, and obviously they're going to seek money from us, and we've talked in this chamber about the leveraging that we get from working with the community. $1 spent, maybe $10, and with the MPI coming on board, this is a 4-year startup, but it's looking to have some longevity. So maybe Tipper has actually asked a very good question here.
Look, I mean, I don't have a firm view at the moment. It's definitely a critical part of the work that we do. I think the community landscape has probably changed since we had catchment committees. So we've got a lot of extra community-driven activity at the moment. And what we're hearing as well is the regulatory change that we've seen is also driving those community groups to establish and help themselves. So I think it's definitely a good discussion. I think the focus would absolutely need to be on how we integrate all those aspects of community involvement, rather than having a community group for one aspect, a community group for another aspect.
Tautoko, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, so really that point was just initiated by Tipper, the one that I'm going to raise, which is I don't actually get a strong sense that this is a plan which has been developed with the community and for the community. The answer I got to the question before about the map with community catchment groups being mapped. I mean, when people, is this plan just for us internally? Because that's the way I'm now thinking about the way it's been written. And yes, it's non-statutory, but you know what? If it's really just some device for us internally, it's not going to get us to where we need to be. And the only way that a community will see themselves in a plan is when they're on the map in the plan, when they're connected to the plan, when they've had some opportunity to comment on the plan. And the answer I got before wasn't the one I wanted to hear. I want to know, how are we linking this plan into the community action on the ground?
So, Grant's looking, he's warming up for a response. My initial thoughts is that it was absolutely community developed initially. That was quite a while ago. And I guess what's been signalled is there is a full review coming up in 2026. I think in terms of providing for an effective review, what would be useful is to start that community engagement sooner rather than later, so we can get to that point and inform that full review of the community of this plan. Obviously, this was a light review, I suppose, but a factual update, I suppose you could say. It's absolutely a point taken that I think warming up to that full review, and this is for all zones as well. This isn't the only zone plan that we have. How do we warm up to those reviews? How do we get that community engagement going to support those full reviews?
Yeah, just to respond to Councillor Clarkson's comments. So yeah, I mean, the light review doesn't include community consultation, but I think the concerns you're raising, well, when we get to the next paper about the development of the Harbour catchment plans, you'll hear more about the engagement that went into those plans. So those have been built from scratch over a 5-year period. And Kerry will talk about the iwi engagement and the other engagement. So that is the next level down. But yeah, I mean, 2026, we will be building towards a full review of the zone plan. I mean, you can't, in terms of care groups, I've been involved with different care groups over the years, and you have to be a bit careful imposing what the council would like on what care groups would like to do themselves. You know, some of them have a single focus, some of them want to deal with multiple things, some of them last for 5 years and disappear. So you have to be a wee bit careful making assumptions about how the council might do certain things with different catchment groups. Anyway, I'll leave that one there for the moment.
Sorry, that doesn't wash with me either. This new group is formed. They have a budget for the next 3 years. They've been knocking on our door already, asking questions about technical information and map opportunities. You're not waiting till 2026 before you start building that relationship, surely. He made a comment about the ebb and flow of groups. Well, we all know that happens, but we have staring us in the face right now a new opportunity. And I want to be sure that it's actually capitalised on.
I just think through the chair, so that the strategies within the zone plan definitely don't preclude that. They are quite high level, which is why you might not see it in there. But in terms of working with communities to undertake actions, catchment management actions on the ground, that sort of thing, that is in there. I guess the level that the zone plan sits at doesn't specify particular community groups by name, but it certainly is within scope of that to undertake work with those. And I know that a couple of our priority catchments for Hill Country, for example, lie within the area of interest of that community group. So the intent would be that we would be undertaking work with those groups. I think that the action plans, which we'll be talking about next, probably specify more of the detail of that. It's just, I think, the level that the zone plan sits at.
Thank you. Councillor Mayor.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie. Could I just remind the committee that you have a really good model in the Wharikawa Coast and a lot of learnings out of it, how we engage with community, TAs, et cetera, and just went along beside them through a process like this. So this isn't out of the realms of something we haven't done before. We've learned from it. Obviously, you've got Thames Coromandel, we've got Harbour District that we're working in. All are slightly different. Take that on board, but we have those models. It's not a slow startup. It's a really quick startup and something that can get underway really quickly. Cheers.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor. Stu, Councillor Kneebone, sorry.
No, Stu's. So this was put together when the West Coast Catchment Committee were really active, and they had a very active involvement in it. Given that it's a light review and the sort of changes we're doing, I personally do not think it would have been worth trying to get enough representative interest from right throughout the West Coast catchment to justify. I don't think the costs would have justified the benefits for the purposes of this light review that we've done here, and for where this particular zone plan sits in the hierarchy of influencing and requiring community input for decision making. The harbour and catchment management plans are, as you'll see shortly, are a different kettle of fish, and there's been a very active community involvement in establishing those as well. I've been to Lemon Kawhia Kai festivals and all sorts of things in the last 5 years while they've been built, you know, and staff have done 10, 20 times more than what elected councillors have been involved in, you know. So, and let's not forget, the previous council made a decision to eliminate the West Coast and the Waipa and all these other catchment committees. And we had very little interest when we suggested to them, would you like to re-establish them? And I'm not saying we shouldn't re-establish something, but you know, since this plan was originally put together, King Country River Care have established, but that's been the only one. The one you guys are talking about now is I've only just become aware of it in the past 6 months since you guys have told me about it, you know, so.
Councillor Mahuta,
I concur, and I'm not trying to push for another committee. I'm asking of us, what's our comms approach over the next 2 years, so that when we do the fuller review of this, we have a sense that the whole community is sitting around that, you know, have been involved. So I appreciate the conversation. And I just want to note, of the Māori land in our region that is owned, it's owned on this west coast. Yeah. So if they're not in the catchment group, the Māori landowners, kawhia, it's essentially surrounded by Māori land ownership. So again, I just note that in because it's unique in our region that if there's Māori land, it's owned on the west coast. So I'm satisfied that they're there in a number of different ways, but I just want to make sure, I'm trying to make sure that by 2026, we've got all the right people talking in. That's all. Kia ora.
Just to reassure you, Tipper, the iwi landowners have been involved in the establishment out there in the west, the West Waikato community catchment group. Thanks.
Thanks, Noel.
Something you want to add?
Just a further response. So these guys have been, while they have formally just started, we went out there a year ago, more than a year ago, and they were in the early stages of development. And there was quite a bit of, how can I say, commentary around the attempts they'd made to connect with here. And so again, I'm just making the point is, you know, if you just sort of look at this and say, oh, well, it's a light review. Okay, what you're telling me actually is it's an internal document. And it's in preparation for an event that's going to occur in 2026. But I would have thought we might need to be a bit more nimble about this when an opportunity like this arises, where a new group is now up and functioning, has a budget, is looking seriously at us for increased, enhanced partnership. That's the point I'm trying to make.
You know, I agree. Grant, could we put an action against that for you to contact that community? Have you had much involvement with them, or I just want to get something moving here?
We have had some contact. Yep. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that sometimes where catchment groups start up, and this might not be a popular answer, it's not where the indications are that they're the biggest areas that WRC is looking to deal with. And on the West Coast, that is sediment. We have a performance standard that requires us to spend 80% of our budget in priority areas. A lot of those catchments of interest for that group are not within those areas, so we are quite restricted with funding. But as I mentioned, there are a couple that are, and we have connected on that basis. But it's,
can I suggest that someone talks to Gina or Teresa, because they were the ones on the email, and I think that's who, because they introduced themselves. Bad memory, but they're the ones. I think if you can talk to them, they would certainly know, because they've been working with that group.
And we actually have an all-day workshop on Monday with around community groups. Teresa will be at that meeting. I'll be at that meeting. Community groups will be attending that meeting to look at how we can identify gaps and better work together to empower community groups to undertake certain functions that in achieving, this one in particular is achieving the National Policy Statement for Fresh Water. So we'll definitely connect as a follow-up action with Teresa and with the group on that day.
Yeah, look, if I could make a closing comment, I think the point is well made about the importance of community engagement in our program, and that this plan that you are being asked to approve today actually won't have life breathed into it unless we work with the community, unless we work with both individual landowners and also the groups that are around. So I think that's absolutely clear. I think it's an opportunity as well as we move towards the larger review of the plan, but that's not going to stop us from working with groups immediately anyway. Thank you. Appreciate the conversation, committee.
And I would like to move it. Councillor Smith, sorry.
Happy to second.
And, who do I? Thank you. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks for all your efforts. I suppose you're here for the next one as well. Continue.
Yeah, so this follows on pretty closely. This is around the development of the harbour catchment plans for Kapia, Aotea and Whangaroa. And I'm not going to cut across Kerry's talk, but this has been 5 years in the making, and it's actually very satisfying to see the work come to this point. It is a CEO KPI that we deliver it by 30th of June, so we're 10 days for that deadline. But there is a massive amount of work in behind this. The technical reviews of each of the harbours, and then the 3 plans. We have kind of bombarded you with paper, but they are 3 plans which are fairly similar with differences, but there are 3 plans at the end of the day. Yeah, I just would like to acknowledge Kerry's work in completing this process. There were different staff involved along the way. Kerry's really had to pull on her iwi relationships to get these plans to the point they are at. So those are relationships built up over 5 years, not in 5 minutes. And there's a lot of work to do, but yeah, they're at a good point now, and I hope you agree by the end of Kerry's talk. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, councillors, and thank you, Mr. Chair. We can go to the first slide. So as Paul mentioned, the development of these plans came out of the 2016 zone plan, which had a priority action around focusing resources and activities and areas of the greatest environmental benefit, and the 3 harbours were identified as being included within that. So the project was kicked off around 2018-19, but was significantly delayed by COVID, and then 2 vacancies. The 2 previous people working on the plans both resigned. And so I just picked this up at the end of last year. So I just want to acknowledge that a lot of the work that has been done and the engagement that I talk about wasn't done by us, but was done by previous employees. So the development was essentially been in 3 phases. There has been a lot of collation of information, review of the existing plans to ensure that we don't reinvent the wheel on priorities and goals that have already been identified, and involving key stakeholders and communities. We held a large number of engagement processes and hui, identifying the values, the issues, options and actions that communities and iwis wanted to see undertaken within their harbours. Very much wanted to reflect, the plans reflect how those communities wanted to see those catchments looking in 10 to 50 years' time. We compiled supporting information reports that were data-driven. And so based on all of that, we drafted goals which were put through council for endorsement, and then we drafted the actions. We then went through a review phase, and now we're at the endorsement phase. Once that's been achieved, we'll look to publish, then implement, and report on progress against implementation. Different to the zone plans, these are very much action plans. They're very specific and measurable goals that deliver on zone plan objectives. So the engagement was substantial. We held a number of workshops, particularly with rural landowners, with iwi representatives, with tangata whenua. We held 8 joint agency workshops. We held drop-in days, as Councillor Kneebone was talking about. We did mail surveys to every landowner, every property owner in the catchment, sent out a mail survey which had a free return, or you could fill it out online. We got a couple of hundred of those back. We went to community board meetings. We attended iwi environmental taiao forums. We attended community events such as the Kai Festival and How Drop-in Days, etc., to really get feedback to understand the concerns, the values, the aspirations for those catchments. One of the things that came back through that feedback was that data about the current condition of the catchments was hard to come by in a one-stop sort of place. So in response to that, we developed these 3 supporting information documents that compiles all of the data that WRC holds on condition of the catchment in terms of biodiversity, biosecurity, water quality, erosion, etc. And so this will be available online that communities can access to find out what the current condition is and what we know about the catchments. So the plans themselves, what came back through the feedback with, from communities and iwi, where there's 4 core areas of interest: water quality, land and its use, people and communities, biodiversity and biosecurity, which were also well aligned to Council's strategic direction. And then a really strong theme of wanting to see more working together out in those catchments, more iwi, community and council partnership projects, more incorporation of Mātauranga Māori into projects. And so that's where the actions have been built under those headings, with a lot of partnership work proposed. The plan itself has background information, a summary of those supporting documents. It lists the concerns and aspirations that we heard from those communities and from those surveys, and then it has the implementation plan, which has the goals, the actions, who's going to undertake them by when, and the performance measures. Noting that it is very much a plan that looks at regional council's work program and what we will deliver, but how we'll work with communities and iwi in order to do that. And to review the drafts, once we drafted those, we held meetings with iwi authority staff, provided them with the draft actions. We held joint workshops with the freshwater policy review team, with drop-in days in Whaingaroa and Kawhia catchments. We met with Te Tai o Kawhia Moana, which is a joint stakeholder iwi community group within the Kawhia catchment, and Te Wharekinga Tai o Kawhia, which is the regional marae committee for Kawhia, and the Aotea Community Board, and got feedback on those actions. It helped enrich those actions a lot, and has got us to the place where we are now with what we're presenting. The feedback we've received, there's been a lot of support, some out of scope issues being raised, still a lot of concern around development in the areas that are district council responsibilities, septic tanks, that kind of thing. But in general, a lot of support for how on the ground focused these plans are. Waikato Tainui wants to see closer engagement at a hapu level post their settlement. We've incorporated this as an action within the plan. The review from Tauranga Whenua recommended the establishment of iwi advisory groups for ongoing plan review, reporting and other engagements. And I guess this kind of reflects a little bit what we were talking about with the previous paper, but having a forum that is available for feedback and reporting to Te Nehinehi Nui and Te Wharekinga Tai o Kawhia really like that idea. They support the plans on the condition that those iwi advisory groups are formed. So the specific actions that are identified and proposed for the next 3 years have existing funding through the draft LTP and through some external funding that we've received through the likes of MPI. We've identified key measures that we propose to report back on progress through annually through this committee and through the co-governance committees as well. Happy for questions.
Councillor Nebo.
Yeah, no, thanks, Harry. It's good to be finally getting to this point. Just curious, with the my recollection, I remember talking to Tracy Dan Spears, they were going to have some, as part of this, the web version was going to incorporate those story maps. Has that been a bit of a casualty of staff, losing staff and resourcing? Because I couldn't find anything online, but haven't looked for a while. But
yeah, so that was a bit of a casualty of losing staff. We do still have the plan for Kawhia that's been developed, the story map, sorry. Yep. So that is likely to go ahead as a trial for how well used that is. That will. The idea was always that the actions from the plan would be included on that story map, but it would be a really digestible way for communities to look at information on the harbours. So I think the intent is still that the Kawhia one will go ahead and then potentially the others to follow.
Yeah, no, cool.
Councillor Mahuda, please, you got a question?
Oh, no, just feedback. Kia ora Kerry, nothing but, aroha mai, I've got 2 mics going. Sorry. Which one do you turn off? Turn off.
We'll go to you for
We're trying to multitask. Got cold. No, I just wanted to express the thanks of Te Tai o Kawhia, Ngāti Hikairo, and the Ngāti Mahuta collectors that all spoke positively of the process, Kerry. So ngā mihi nui kia koutou and the team for the work done, and I'm happy to second the adoption of the plans. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor.
Thank you. The pronunciation's Ma, but I won't get hung up on that. Just jumping back, and it's part of this, but just jumping back to a comment you made in the previous presentation. You're holding a meeting, I understand, with community groups on the MPS freshwater.
So the full background is that MFE has engaged various entities across the regions to help develop community ability to deliver on aspects of the MPS freshwater. So that has been led by Go Eco, Regional Council are attending, Teresa's attending, myself attending, community groups, the likes of Punu River Care, Department of Conservation, TLAs will all be attending that to look at how we can identify the gaps and support community groups to help deliver on appropriate actions within the MPS.
Okay, so it's been led by them, Go Eco, rather than Waikato Regional Council.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Clarkson.
Yeah, I'm just interested if you give us a comment on how all of this fits together. We've just had the paper on the Lite review. We now have harbour catchment plans, and we have the existing already coastal plan. And I noticed some elements of the catchment plans actually contain the information that some of us were asking for before the coastal plan was finalised, in the sense that it's a coastal marine plan, not a coastal plan. Can you give us some assurance about how all of this is being done in a integrated way?
So that the plans were being sort of developed concurrently, the coastal plan and these plans. In terms of the zone plan, that is informed by the policy and then sets a high level direction, and then around priority areas or priority catchments for particular focus and development of community aspirations. That's where the catchment plans fit. You'll see that the actions within the catchment plans are much more specific and wide-ranging because we've established it as a priority area. But it's also been informed by other processes and intends to sit alongside those with the coastal plan containing regulation and covering the coastal marine area, and this plan covering the land and the margins of the harbour biosecurity, but not actually actions within marine waters.
Yeah, I'm wondering if at some stage we could have a nice diagram showing us how all this fits together, because I guess what I'm angling at here is both integration but also lack of duplication of effort. And I'm wondering now about the Lite review and whether or not a Lite review was the right decision, and whether or not something should have gone more quickly to the end game. So yeah, that's why I'm asking these questions. And so at some stage it would be quite nice to have some, even a really brief paper which had a few diagrams and figures in it that shows us how all of this actually fits together.
Just through the chair, the delay of the full review was in part because there was a decision to undertake a regional catchment management strategy, and that it wouldn't have been appropriate to do full reviews and the cost and time involved in that without that overarching regional review, regional catchment management strategy. So the plan is that will be developed in the next couple of years in time to inform the zone reviews.
I can appreciate our situation as we get a report put in front of us And if we don't have that overarching view of how it all fits together, some of our questions may be highly ill-informed. But then again, they might be uncovering some elements of how this could be planned better. Thank you.
One thing I did acknowledge is that earlier there was a diagram that was put up that did show the connectivity across regulatory and non-regulatory realms, from national, regional, and implementation. So I think that might be a good start that we can. I was just looking to see if it was included in the.
Yeah, that'd be a
package.
good start, but it's our
was.
work streams that I'm really interested in. Is, you know.
Yeah, we could include some more detail around that. That's high level. It shows sort of the cascade from national to regional to local policy and into these implementation documents. But we could definitely provide something that includes some commentary about exactly how those threads are connected.
So we'll note that for our next meeting.
Councillor Kneebone.
Oh, yeah, no, look, it's a good question. I think that would be good. And I think it is important to keep these as non-statutory, separate from that statutory regulatory document, because people have a view, rightly or wrongly, about rules and regulations, and they are quite different. This was about, as I see it, about, and that was kind of the flavour that came about with the Catchment Committee when we were designing these, or contributing to the design of them. They're about bringing people together and saying, what are the things you value? And if we've got X dollars to assist people with restoration efforts, where's the best place to put it, you know? Which is quite different from what the coastal policy plan, regional coastal plan does. Yeah.
Any more questions? We have a mover and a seconder, so all in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Thanks for all your hard work. Yeah, do we want to take a rest for 5 minutes or want to continue on? 5. Okay, thank you.
See how we go.
Yeah. We're going to have 5. They're already moved. Yeah.